Welcome to this quick introduction of the Single Sign-On Service version 1.4 for Pivotal Cloud Foundry. SSO is meant to be a universal identity broker that integrates your enterprise identity providers with your applications on Cloud Foundry. SSO integrates with any enterprise identity federation system and presents them as pre-configured options for applications to integrate with using basic OAuth and OpenID compliant tokens that can be used by frameworks such as Spring Security, enabling your application developers to maximize their velocity. SSO supports identity federation standards such as SAML, OAuth, and OpenID Connect, and also supports LDAP. Application developers can use our self-service interface, and new in 1.4 can bootstrap client configurations and resources through application manifests. Operators can leverage our admin dashboards, multi-tenant services, and integration guides. These features are all built on top of Cloud Foundry's user account and authentication service. Operators can create service plans and configure identity providers as options that application developers can use. Application developers can use frameworks such as Spring Boot for Java and Steeltoe OSS for .NET and integrate their applications with the SSO tile to maximize their velocity. This diagram represents an end-to-end flow. A user accesses the client or application that you have. That client then forwards on to single sign-on for authentication and authorization. And SSO, acting as an identity broker, can send the corresponding authentication request to your configured identity providers. It will then return a token back to your application, and your application can forward that token onto your APIs, which can validate that the token is valid against the SSO service. Now let's go ahead and demonstrate the features of SSO on our Pivotal Web Services platform. So you can see here that I've created an organization, and I am going to go ahead and bind the SSO service through a service instance. This is currently an empty service instance. I don't have any application configurations or resources. I am going to create all of these values on Bootstrap. You can see here that I currently do not have any users but I've pre-configured the identity providers such as Google's OpenID Connect. I've also created an LDAP integration and a SAML integration. And for these, I've also used things like external groups and user info that are made available as custom attributes to our user info endpoint. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you the applications that I've prepared. For example, for this application, I've specified it to bind on startup to the service instance that I created. I've also specified the API server location, the identity providers that it will use, the scopes that it will have, and the SSO resources that it will create in order for it to use. And I've done the same for some of these other clients. And finally, for my resource server, this is an extension of our identity sample application resource server, for which I've added a few other features tied to new scopes. And you can see here the Spring Boot notation that enforces these scopes. Now, as these applications are loading, I want to go ahead and show you the environment variables that single sign-on service uses. So these are a demonstration of the values that it uses to create the client configurations for bootstrapping. And here is an example of the client configurations that it will use in order to set the right values for frameworks such as Spring Security and steel toe to configure their runtime configurations. Now that this application has booted up, I'm going to go ahead and log into the first application, which is configured to use Google. And because Google is our enterprise authentication identity provider, I have to also log in via my enterprise login and meet our enterprise security requirements. But once you see that I've gone ahead and logged in, it will go ahead and show me the token that was created for me. And you'll notice that I was authenticated via my identity provider for Google. Now, I do not have the scopes I need to perform the capabilities through the resource server, so I can assign those through our admin UI. But I don't want to have to manually assign roles for all of my users, so I will also go ahead and define some resource permissions mappings for my other identity providers, so that when users log in from those other identity providers, they will automatically be granted the permissions that they need. And if you'll notice, all of these values for the scopes as well were created on load time. So just to demonstrate, I will come back in to our service instance, and you'll see that my client configurations have all been created for me for my different clients, and the resources that I'm assigning through the backend were also created via the application manifest bootstrapping that we performed earlier. And putting the finishing touches on our permission sets, my users will be able to log in and they will be granted the scopes automatically from now on. But for my first user, I will have to come back in so that the manually assigned attributes that I have been granted to me, and I can go to my API server and perform the corresponding capabilities that are protected via the server. Now for my second user, I've gone ahead and created a second client that is tied to a SAML login. And for the SAML login, I will go ahead and log in as a manager user. And you'll see upon this login that it has a few other items here, such as custom attributes that I've exposed, as well as I've automatically been granted through resource permissions mapping the scopes that I need to perform the functions that I want. And you'll see here a few other information as well that came back from the identity provider, along with an origin of SAML, which is the name that I provided for my SAML identity provider. And you'll be able to see here now, as a manager, I can only do the functionality that I'm supposed to do. So I cannot finish people's tasks, but I can tell people to do their things again. I cannot delete, but I can tell them they should do this important manager task. And then for my third client as well, you'll be able to see this is a LDAP login. So for LDAP, we use chained authentication, which means that it will not use a different screen, but we will be able to collect the credentials and log you in directly. So for this user, you'll see I've logged in as an administrator. And then I can go ahead and delete people's or perform the administrative capabilities that I'm supposed to be able to do, which in this case is delete, but I cannot do things that I'm not supposed to be able to do. And then of course, just to demonstrate what it looks like if you have multiple identity providers, we have both this default screen or we have the um, so if you do come in with different identity providers, you'll be able to see multiple options on the screen, or you can configure our identity discovery features in order to show you only the options that are tied to domains for specific types of people. And that concludes our demonstration of the single sign-on service. For more in-depth demos, please refer to our identity sample applications or our Freddy's Barbecue examples that are available on GitHub. Thank you very much and have a good day.